I'm so grateful to our sponsors for making this summit possible, to bring in the caliber of speakers that we have. As one of the editors of The Advocate told me, he said, Boo, if you held this same conference in New York, you would be charging $1,000 a day. I said, great idea, but I didn't do it. But it just shows you that Louisiana has a special place in many people's hearts, and that's how I think they agree to come back. Ron Sims is back here after 10 years. Well, he was at our very first summit in 2003, which is more than 10 years ago. Y'all knew what happened to give us a little delay in those numbers. But we're celebrating today the lessons that we've learned collectively and the ways in which we've literally grown smarter together, building important relationships along the way, and the rich opportunity that the summit offers to look at what the next 10 years can be and hopefully will be. We've brought together in these 2 days our Louisiana leadership, that's you, and bringing you together with internationally renowned thinkers, innovators, and motivators. The summit is also a commemoration of the horrible hurricanes of 2005, Rita and Katrina. And we have to remember the losses and hardships suffered by so many thousands, and that those sufferings continue to be with us today, and as we continue to seek ways to do things differently, to do things better as we move ahead. I'd like to really try and call you to action, that you attend as many sessions as possible. There's some very special ones. I don't know how you're going to choose. If you've been at the summit before, we usually give you 3 choices per session. I finally listened to my amazing staff, and we didn't do that. We instead only have 2 at most, unless you're getting CLEs. So don't miss the chance to hear these exciting speakers and panelists and hear what they have to say, but to ask those hard questions, participate in the dialogue, and meet new people with whom to collaborate. And then go back to your work and your home and your retirement happy, invigorated, and inspired. I always wait till the end of the summit to thank the people who are really responsible. But, you know, Jennifer's not even in here, but she's the very lithe, is that the right word? Woman with long blonde hair, and she's got an orange, we're kind of matching, but hers is orange and white striped. Jennifer got married September 12th and still put the summit on. Pretty amazing, huh? So thanks to Jennifer and all of the CPEC staff that made this very special summit possible. I'd like to now introduce Cardell Heyman, who is my board chair and has been my board chair for the past 10 years, ever since CPEX was created. He was CEO and continues to be Executive Vice President of SGS Petroleum. He's a visionary when it comes to seeing the value of planning and how necessary it is to his very successful company. His company has been in the top LSU 100 for all 5 years that it's been noted, and that means it's growing that much each year. That's pretty phenomenal. And I think that his influence is also why CPEX has been so successful. I have a number of board members here today, and I want to thank them. I want to thank our special sponsor for this session, JP Morgan Chase, and all of our sponsors, and a lot of you in the audience. And I want to thank you so much for being here. And now I would like to welcome Cardell Heyman.
Thank you, Boo, for that nice introduction. On behalf of the Board of Directors of CPEX, I'd like to welcome all of you to this 10th Smart Growth Summit. In a moment, I'll be introducing our first speaker, Ron Sims, and it's appropriate that he was speaker at our very first Smart Growth Summit in 2003. So it's great to have him back. In the program that you have, I think there's a page that looks at the things that CPEX has accomplished over these last 10 years, and also at the things that we're focused on for the coming 10 years. So I think this is an appropriate occasion to pause and really appreciate the good work that's been done by Boo and her amazing staff, but also, as Boo said, by so many of you, because you've been partners with us in this work over all this time. And I feel we've made a lot of progress. Yesterday I heard Ron Sims give a talk in which he commented on the changes he's seen in downtown Baton Rouge since he was here last in 2003. And those of you who were here then can recognize that the changes are actually pretty profound. And of course, we're very proud of that progress that's been made. Again, there have been many contributors, but it all started with the planning process known as Plan Baton Rouge, which I chaired and Boo led in 1998. And our belief was that if we could do a good job of making a new plan, we could resurrect what was viewed by most people as a dead and decaying downtown Baton Rouge. And today it's so energized that you can scarcely get around in a vehicle for all of the construction projects that are filling up all the streets. So I think that continues to serve as an inspiration to us for what kind of change is possible with the right kind of planning. As Boo mentioned, the putting on a conference like this is a tremendous undertaking, and we're so lucky to have Jennifer Stenhouse and Boo and her staff to plan and put on this conference. And the lineup of speakers that we have is, I will say, it's the most amazing that we've had yet in our 10 years. And I want to also express appreciation to the elected officials and planning commissioners who are with us today, and planning staff members who are with us. This is such a great learning opportunity, and frankly, at times I've been dismayed to be at this conference and have elected officials or planning commissioners show up for like 1 hour and then disappear, as though there's nothing important for them to learn. So I hope that you'll make every effort to stay with this conference. You'll never have a better opportunity to learn and understand more about the importance of planning. I do want to express also appreciation to the members of CPEX. We constantly encounter people who are surprised to learn that we're not some kind of government-supported agency. Actually, we're not. We're a membership-supported agency. Many of you are members. If you're not a member, I would encourage you to consider becoming a member. We require that revenue to be able to continue the work that we're doing. For those who are members, I thank you very much. As I looked around this morning, I saw a lot of familiar faces, and I know that many of you have been here for past Smart Growth Summits. I think the fact that you are here repeatedly says a lot about the value that you find in this event. A value to gain knowledge and inspiration and insights and to form relationships with others. So thank you for being here. And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker this morning, Ron Sims. Ron was born in Spokane, Washington, and graduated from Central Washington University. He served for 12 years as the elected executive of King County in the state of Washington, which is the 13th largest county in the nation, 1.8 million residents, and comprising 39 cities, including Seattle, Bellevue, and Richmond. As the county executive, Ron was nationally recognized for his work on the integration of environmental, social equity, and public health policies that produced groundbreaking work on climate change, healthcare reform, affordable housing, mass transit, environmental protection, land use and equity, and social justice. In 2009, Ron became the Deputy Secretary for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, appointed by President Obama. He was the second senior official at HUD, managing the day-to-day operations of that agency, which has 8,500 employees and a $40 billion a year operating budget. Ron has been recognized on many occasions for being such an important leader. I can't read you the whole list. One of them was he was named Leader of the Year by American City and County Magazine, and he's received awards from many other organizations for the great work that he's done. I noticed that Ron is self-described today as a civic volunteer, which implies to me that he's no longer working a quote, day job. But he's staying pretty busy. He's on the Board of Regents of Washington State University. He's on the Puget Sound Leadership Council, which has responsibility for the ecological health of Washington's largest estuary. He's on the board of directors of the Washington Health Alliance, and he's just very involved as a thinker and speaker around the country. So we're so happy to welcome Ron Sims.
Thank you, buddy.
I want to say good morning to everyone, and it's great to be here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and it's good to be in Louisiana again as well. Before I don't want to forget this. First, I want to thank all the sponsors to this event. That's really, really important. But I need to say this. I've been here now for 2 days, and I was looking at. I have two apps. I have a Fitbit app, and I have a Apple Health app, and I feel guilty when I turn them on, so I keep them off, so I keep them on, and so I decided to walk. And I don't recognize Baton Rouge from what it was 10 years ago. It is incredible. It is not only walkable, it's beautiful. Everything seems to be seamlessly being integrated. There's a lot of green. I love looking at the river and the boats on it. The levee walk yesterday was great. The levee walk this morning was great. People are friendly. The food is good. Not good for my waistline, but the food is really good. But I think it's a testimony to the fact that when IBM made a decision to make this a regional center, their executive did what I did. They walked around the streets of a city, because streets and walkability tell you everything about what an area is doing to compete with the world. And Baton Rouge was very successful at landing IBM because they were competitive and necessary. So I want to give as I would say, my kids would say, a good shout out to all the parties that made Baton Rouge what it is today. Smart growth, what is it? And it's really, to me, it's just, I will tell you, when I became county executive, we were not a smart growth community. We were just watching, as we say, people come in, come out, and we didn't have a game plan for how we would implement strategies. I'm in an area that is incredibly liberal on social issues and environmental issues, but very conservative on financial issues. And so our budget people and our finance people were really, really good at marrying their interests with what we call the outcomes. What do we want to be when we grew up? And I used to say that. Everybody, what are we going to be when we grow up? And what this meant is, did we know what we were going to be each year and what we were going to mature? So we looked at our data, and we became a data-rich environment. And all we used to say is, if we have sprawl, is it free? Our first study on sprawl said no, that we could predict, and it was interesting, we ended up breaking down silos, but we asked the people who were in transportation, public health, and land use planning to work together with the University of British Columbia and to determining whether there were health impacts to sprawl. We just wanted to know what they were. And it was really interesting. They wouldn't talk to each other. They're really brilliant people who just couldn't communicate. couldn't, or they wouldn't, I don't know. Each of them thought that their discipline was correct. And so after 6 months, I was asked to go talk to them, which I did. I said, can we work collaboratively? And then 3 months later, they weren't working collaboratively, so I hinted that their future employment careers and decisions I had to make would be on the line if I could not get a product from them. And they came back with an incredible list. They learned to listen to each other. Every discipline was really, really great, but they learned to listen. And all they said is that we can tell you that if you commute 1 hour a day in a car from your home to work and back home, you're likely to be a candidate for cardiac issues when you get in your 70s. Because the body was never designed for 13 hours of constant stress. You wake up in the morning and already you're getting stressed because you're thinking about work. If you have children, trying to organize them, which is a monumental task anyway. Then you get in your car, you're at stress all day, you come back home for that hour, you still have all these things to do. 8:30 to 9 o'clock, according to television commentators and people who produce movies, do TV shows, is what we call the opiate hour. It's when you sit down and you just all of a sudden go, ah. And then it is also not a good time to talk about money. And so if you have financial issues, you never want to raise those at 8:30, maybe 10 o'clock, maybe earlier in the morning, but never during the opiate hour. So that's what we told everybody. There was an impact that we did not know. But that taught us a lesson about other things that we also did not know. We didn't know how the Puget Sound functioned. Here, this body of water that we have rivers going into. We didn't have any ideas as to what was occurring there until the Environmental Protection Agency and National Marine Fisheries Service told us that we had 3 species that were endangered, and therefore we were obligated to recover them. And I remember bringing 400 people into the opening meeting, and they all said, why did you select us? I said, it's because each of you has the capacity to litigate, and we're not going to litigate the issues of these listings. And the reason why is we will still lose. And the idea is, can we garner all the interests? Municipalities, banks, and major employers, and simply say we have to move forward with the recovery of species. So what did our data tell us? Our data told us that we didn't have the slightest idea what was happening in our area. We did not know. We didn't know what the population growth meant to us. We didn't know where it was going to go. We didn't know what transportation systems we needed and how we were going to organize them and how we would move people efficiently. We didn't know what else would crop up to us in terms of another listing. We didn't know how species functioned. We didn't know how the climate worked. We didn't know anything. So we began to ask ourselves those tough questions. The answer, though, came out all the time. We were not smart in how we grew. We were continuing the practice of allowing everything that everybody else was doing to be what we were doing. But when you're 1.8 million people, you can't do what everybody else is doing. All of a sudden, you have risks that you can't cover anymore because as government, you don't have the money. We had a budget of $5.5 billion, and yet we knew we could not meet the demands of our communities. The cities couldn't either. The state couldn't either, and so something had to fundamentally change. And we birthed our smart growth strategies out of financial risk, employment risk, and we did not want to be unacceptable to people to move in. We knew that when major companies were going to make a decision about where they located, they did not want to be the ATM for our incompetence. So we needed to be attractive to them financially. We needed to tell them why we were not a risk to them, that we were dealing with a whole series of underlying problems and a strategy we called smart growth, and that we would be wedded to that, and they would be comfortable, and in large part, they would not face the repercussions financially of the decisions we made. We had a really frank talk with Microsoft because Microsoft can go anywhere in the world, trust me. And they were thinking about maybe we need to reduce our impact in King County and move to someplace else. So we asked them, what did they want and what did their employees want? And they said, our employees want green. I said, no, what else do they want? No, they loved the biggest selling point for Microsoft of having people come into our area as a preference was the fact that we had parks greenways, playgrounds. The problem was they were not evenly distributed, and we had not endeavored to save them. We had forests that we were there, they were beautiful, but we had assumed that one day they would be harvested and developed. So we made a decision in King County government with the nonprofit community-based organizations to acquire acreage on those forests. I gave a speech once and said we were going to acquire 100,000 acres of forest, and my staff came back and said, what? I said, I know you guys are bright enough to find a way. And when I left, we had acquired 197,000. The newest executive has acquired another 45,000, and next year there will be a ballot issue to get the last 60,000. Why? Because preservation of green space is absolutely critical in the 21st century. If you want people to live in your community and enjoy it, they love green. It gives them a sense of freedom, it gives them a sense of movement, it gives them a clear sense there's a quality of life being preserved. If you're in Sacramento, California, they'll tell you that they have more trees than anybody else. So I told everybody, we cannot let Sacramento beat us. My cousin lives there. So we cannot let that happen. So they said, what are you going to do? I said, we'll plant until we have more trees. We went to the cities, and I told them the same thing. I said, you have any relatives in Sacramento? I have one. They say that they are the tree capital of the world. So all of a sudden we said, not only would there be tree installation, but you had to have permits to remove trees, because we wanted that foliage, because they had heard the same message from the technology community that we really wanted to have placed there, how important that green space was. So one of the elements of smart growth is, first, what are you going to do with the land? Are you just going to let it develop? Or are you going to think about having the land mixed, we call it development, mixed in with your green space and your greenways, your parks? Everybody loves the park. I mean, I've been Hank Aaron in a park by myself or on a team. I walk up, I'm going to be Hank Aaron today. Every child needs to be able to dream about something that they want to be or somebody they want to be. And that's what parks and playgrounds allow us to do. I'm older now, and I love to walk, as I have found out walking in this marvelous city. But I know there are other cities or other communities. So if I was in your community, I'd get up and walk in those communities as well. I tell you everything. And when I can walk and feel safe, Lord, I'll walk all day long. But we know the benefits of walking are very, very clear. They're good for adult health. If you want to reduce the impacts of Alzheimer's and dementia, you have senior citizens walk. Their data is now overwhelming medically. If you want children who have the capacity to learn, you ensure that they walk. Children who don't walk don't learn well. It is something that happens to our genes, because we used to say your genes never change, your genes change all the time. And 40% of your chromosomes do it as well. So we know that something that just walking, but you don't walk if you don't feel safe. You don't walking if there's not a safe passage. You don't walk if you're not encouraged to do that. You don't walk if you can't walk into a park and see other people. And I now like to walk and sit down on the benches and look around at all that energy being burned up, and wish I had some of it, but I don't anymore. But it's still lots of fun watching families and children and other people sit. I feel a part of something. I don't feel abandoned and alone. So walkability is very, very important in our street designs, our neighborhood designs, and in our communities. Whether you're in a rural area, in King County, I made a decision, along with the rural cities, that we would maintain their character and their culture, period. And that meant that we had to push back against a number of different interests who wanted to alter rural communities. And we said, hold a second, let the rural community make a decision on where it wants to go. You don't ask Ron Sims, who loves urban areas, to go out and make a decision about how a rural community should look and feel. All I know is that we can provide resources so they can accomplish their goals, but we did have some elements to them. We wanted to make sure that they still provided a variety of housing. We still wanted to make sure that they protected their greenways and their parks, and we would help them do that. We still wanted to make sure that they had access to transportation systems for people who lived in rural areas who were commuting. We wanted to make sure that they were free from flooding, or if they were flooded, that we had a way to easily evacuate, and that we had an easy way of protecting, if they were farmers, their crops, their timber, their cattle, their chickens. I don't know about the chickens, but with their chickens, we didn't have to worry about their ducks or geese. what we said is to them that rural character was important. So we saw a whole. Sustainability always does that. Sustainability isn't something that you do in urban areas. Sustainability is what you do when you want viable rural cities or rural towns. They can be sustainable as well. And we used to say to those communities, but please, whatever you do, don't go out there and try to persuade Microsoft located in your town, because then you're not going to be rural anymore. And quite frankly, there's a law that says you can't, that we enforce, and we will discourage that. But we didn't have any problem because the rural areas were very functional in our community and are still remaining very, very functional. Smart growth works no matter where you live. The other issues were that we believed that there had to be social goals, to be blunt. That we were a community that was changing very rapidly because the world was changing very rapidly. We were a major trade center. We have a large port. We're close to China. We had a lot of people flying in and out. And we had to say to ourselves, hold a second, is this a place where we can have equality put in place? Do people want to move here? How do we get people to live together and work together and see themselves as what we call a competitive force for the world? So we looked at social outcome. Who loses? Who loses? And how do we know they're losing? And I'll tell you how we found that out. I had given a speech like that to the Seattle Urban League, and then I went back, and then the next week I had to go back to Washington, D.C., and there was a press conference, and I was taking my kids with me, so I said, why don't you guys go into the press conference and take every piece of paper, but do not take any duplicates. And they said, okay, so they came back with a box. And it was done by the Joint Center, which is an African-American think tank in Washington, D.C. And they said, after surveying the entire United States, that 36% of African-American males under the age of 30 would have nothing in common with America except their ultimate death. That was stunning. So I came back and I handed that report to a person named Chandler Felt in my office, who was a demographer. I mean, he loved data. I don't know where he found it or how he finds it or why he loves it, but he was just, wonderful voice. God, I wish I had his voice. Really unassuming. I wish I had his voice. But, I'd go to Chandler and I would say to Chandler, you got my data yet? He said, I'm working on it. And I had a rule. I said that I love smart people. So I would tell people that smart people have great ideas. And I gave them license to pursue them. And I said, if you achieved, I would just love you forever, all around the world. If you failed, I would applaud you forever. And if you didn't do anything, I would make it a miserable workday. And the idea was to cultivate a dynamic government willing to challenge and ask the tough questions on smart growth, because there was so much money and so much life, what we call future quality of life, riding on those decisions. And they came back. So Chandler came into my office and said, you'll love this report. And all the report said is that after all this work with the Department of Public Health that we had, that was ours, that with the transportation, with school districts, with all of the data that was publicly available, we could predict by zip codes life outcomes for everybody. For everybody. And I remember this Seattle Times finding out that we had that, and they allowed us a full page. PBS came in and said, well, we hear you have a tool that allows you to predict by zip codes all kinds of demographic factors. We said, no, life outcomes it's not just demographics, it's life outcomes. So they took that tool down to Modesto, California, and they ran a series on PBS validating that tool, because it applies anywhere in the United States. We could tell you what the lifetime earnings of children are going to be by zip code. We can tell you morbidity rates by zip code. We can tell you what kind of medical treatment you're going to have by zip code. We can tell you, a life story by zip codes. And when I went back to HUD, I remember everybody said to us, can you tell us this thing about zip codes? And I said, I'll give you the tool. And here are the people who used the tool in King County, because we applied it to every single zip code in King County, every one of them. and the cities were dumbstruck by what they found. In my zip code, 98144, if you have diabetes, you're going to get a pill. 5 blocks from me is the most diverse zip code in the entire United States, 98118, and you're going to get an amputation as a method of treatment, not a pill. Can you understand how dramatically different those two is? I can still walk with a pill. I'm impeded, and my quality of life is compromised when I have an amputation. 2 different outcomes, and all we were is 5 blocks apart. So what we did on Smart Growth is we made a decision that we would look at all of those zip codes that had challenges, and we would say, what is in them that all of a sudden says we should be worrisome? And Seattle was once segregated. So North Seattle had a lot of trees, a lot of parks, a lot of wide sidewalks, a lot of everything. And so the south part of Seattle, called Southeast Seattle, did not have those by design. It's interesting because Mayor Norm Rice of Seattle lived 1/4 mile north of me, and county executive, governor, Secretary of Commerce, and Ambassador Locke lived 1/4 mile south of me. We all came out of Southeast. But we all had one goal, which is to change how Southeast looked. We all belonged to the same organization, Southeast Effective Development. We made everybody mad. We took pieces of data and said, well, hold a second, why don't we have better parks? People would say, well, you'll never use them and they're not safe. Oh, we said, whoa, you can't. How can you declare something unsafe when we don't have it? We had no playgrounds on any schools. That's stunning. We did not have adequate sidewalks. They were very narrow, therefore unsafe. We had an older community that was retiring in place but would never leave their homes. We had no retail restaurants other than, the fast food industry. We were a community forgotten and left to its own devices. And we said that needed to change. Our smart growth approaches changed 2/3 of Southeast Seattle, and the last 1/3 is being changed based upon the fact that they're going to have parks and playgrounds and pathways, community centers. They're going to have gathering points for senior citizens so they can sit and look, because senior citizens love to sit and look and know who is in the neighborhood. And I grew up in a neighborhood that if you made a senior citizen mad, you did not want to go home and see your parents. Everybody knew how to get a hold of your parents, but I'm telling you, that behavior was adjusted. You want those things. That's what smart growth also means. It also says that you need to have adequate transit systems. And we realized that the community most transit dependent had the fewer buses per 1,000 users. So we all of a sudden said, why aren't we beefing up our transit system? And people said, well, no one has ever asked us to. So we added more buses. Those buses are still our most popular route. So now we're adding more, the newest executives are adding more and more buses. The mayor's now adding more and more buses. The idea is you have to have adequate transit systems. So Harvard University did a study on Seattle and King County and said, what areas of the, and when they looked at us, because they looked at all the data across the country and said, the community as large, both on the county side and the city side, who broke up what we call second generational poverty faster than anybody else in the country was King County and Seattle. Why? Because people had access to employment because they had adequate transit systems to get employed. So I would tell you that smart growth thinks through these issues, it doesn't shy away from them, and says, what is the solution? That was an equity one. Simply, how do we move people? So smart growth looks at transportation systems, it looks at parks and playgrounds because those are health issues and educational issues. Crime rates in communities that have green features are 70% lower than communities without them. If you want to stop crime, you can put all the police you want, and trust me, I was in the school of deploy more police, and it never slowed down crime rates anywhere. It doesn't anywhere. But we found out, as the Justice Department found out, that you green out a neighborhood, and for whatever reasons, it changes. We know why now, in many respects, but it changes. So I would tell people, if you want to fight crime, then you green out a neighborhood. We had rural prosperity, and it was really interesting because our rural areas prospered the entire time I was executive and still prosper now. And the issue was pretty simple. We said to them, here's the size of your community. Please don't grow much bigger because you don't have the money to handle growth. You simply don't. That requires more police officers, it requires some sewer lines, all that. And the cities actually decided that the rural nature of them said, if you keep your hands off us, we'll make sure that we limit who has the opportunity to build here. And it wasn't an issue of telling people you're not welcome. It was the issue of their wishing to make a decision that their rural character was incredibly important. But it also required us to make investments, to make sure that we had public health available in those communities, that we would have regional policing in those communities, that we would have a 911 system that would address rural cities. So we created a rural component to our 911 services. So if you called an ambulance, you still had the ability in the same time frames to be served as you would have in many of the urban areas. It was just easy for us to do it that way. So those are the things you do when you have sustainability. It's just taking data and being smart with it. Do you want rural areas to stay? The answer is yes. In rural areas, I had an ordinance that we passed, and some people in the rural area got really mad at me because it said you could not upstream your property's flow downstream on somebody else. Now that's just called being a good neighbor. We have people who say, well, you're telling me that I can't dump water on my neighbor? I say, well, if you're going to be a good neighbor, which is to me a moral issue, an integrity issue, you don't pour water onto their property and say it's your problem now. And so they decided to run a statewide initiative against what I did, and they lost in every single community in the state of Washington. They were trounced because the issue of having a property right and its use to damage somebody else's property was unacceptable because people thought that was a divisive issue for a community. It would not bring a community together. Oregon did the opposite. And what Oregon did in their community is they allowed it. So people sold their properties, and all of a sudden junkyards showed up, toxic dumping sites showed up, and people were saying, hold a second, that wasn't rural character. That's not what we wanted. We learned that lesson. So I want to say that smart growth encompasses not only a high livability standard on the health side, on the economic growth side, on the ability to have every community thrive and people in those communities thrive. It is absolutely key. I would tell you the 21st century, a century of no mercy. No mercy. We've had Detroits, we've had Pittsburghs, we've had Clevelands, we've had Newark, New Jerseys. There is no mercy shown when it's not going to be there. And if you think your community is going to exist and everybody's going to love you, trust me, you're in a competitive environment with the rest of the world. And they would rather have people in your community living in them. We've had in our state, 25% of all rural towns are now closed. 25%, they're gone. When I drive to Spokane, I used to say that it used to be this city, it used to be this town, it used to be. They're gone because of the pressures on them. But at the same time, I would tell you that my Nana lived in a rural town. And, I remember having to get up in the morning and clean those chickens, and I, to this day, used to say, I love you, Nana, I hate your chickens. She had hogs. All she used to say is run, because she said the hogs will eat you whatever you feed them. I love my Nana, and I loved the rural community that she lived in. When they had a party, everybody came. Everybody was a good neighbor. That's what smart growth is. So you have some incredible opportunities available to you. So let me tell you why I think it's so important. Everybody had a first love. Everybody has one. And I had one. I remember the first time I was ever in love. And I remember I had brought over to my place, and I had, Smokey Robinson on a hi-fi set. He was working it. She had baked a pound cake. I love pound cake. I had something trying to function as a candle. And she looked up at me, and as I was eating that pound cake, and she said, I forgot the sugar. I smiled at her and said, "Y'all, the sugar this man will ever need." I followed her to Seattle, and life showed up. I saw her. Somebody said, "You got to go see Sharon." So I went over to see her. And we talked, and we laughed, and we talked about old times and what had happened in our lives and our careers. And we talked about that dinner moment and all the secrets we would keep for the rest of our lives. And then I remember looking at her and giving her a kiss on the cheek, and as she closed her eyes and I walked away, then I turned around and I stopped. I just stopped and looked at her. And then she woke out of a very drowsy sleep and shook her head and said, "You silly man, you silly man, come here, you silly man." And I took a step. I said, "Ron, don't lose it." And I took a second step, and I walked over her, and I just cried and cried and cried. And she said something I will never forget. She said, "My job is done, and your life and my life has come to its end. But you have so much to do." A higher authority than any of you in this room has determined that your life is not done because there's so much to do. A loving respect. And it's asking you to make our community smarter, to have the quality of life of everyone in it be better. And there's no other tool available right now, none, anywhere in the world than smart growth. None. And you'll find that out today. It's the innovative atmosphere and culture that you create when you have smart growth. That is the tool you've been given to use. And the issue is, you want to say, will it work? The answer is, you must trust it works because you are here. You have purpose in your life. Purpose. Not because I think you have purpose, but because a higher authority thinks you have purpose. And I will tell you, you've been given one more day, which will be one more week, and one more month, and one more year. And you won't have to talk about calibration of risks. You won't have to talk about how people's lives will be better. You'll go out there, and people who don't know you will sit there with their kids in the playground and say, life is good and life is sweet. And so I want to tell you, just go ahead and girdle up, and simply say, there is nothing too formidable for me. Somebody in Baton Rouge said 10 years ago, we will not quit. New Orleans does not quit. All these parishes are saying they cannot quit. There's got to be some state that walks around with their chest out and says, oh, we bad. We bad. There is nobody doing it better than us because we do it well. We're Louisianans. We do it really well. So I can go to my state and say, whoa, I was in Louisiana. Oh, they just, talk a lot of trash about how good their quality of life was. And all of a sudden it radiates. So be a leader. Don't be shy. Be in front, not behind. Don't follow, lead. Take those risks. If you succeed, I'll sing your praises. If you applaud, well, if you fail, we'll applaud you for trying. But please welcome the challenges that smart growth provides. It is the only mechanism to house people. It's the only mechanism left for seniors to be able to walk safely. It's the only mechanism powerful enough to reduce crime, increase school opportunities. It is the only mechanism left to alter this great country, who all of us want to be the greatest country ever. Not the grand experiment, the grand exporter of our greatness. Thank you and peace to you.
Wow. So you can see why Ron Sims has been such a fantastic leader. And if you know Seattle, as I do because my daughter lives there, you know that the change that he helped bring about there has created one of the great cities in the world. And you don't do that without the passion that I think we've all seen from Ron this morning. One other thing I'm reminded of because he started out with the question, well, what is smart growth? And then he talked about 25 different things, and it reminds me always of what Andres Dewani told me when we did Plan Baton Rouge 17 years ago, which is, well, in planning, everything connects to everything else. And I think Ron understands that at the deepest possible level. So we have just a moment for a question or two. Is there anyone who would like to pose a question? I think I see a hand right here.
Hi, my name is Naomi Warner, and I work with the Alliance to Fight Blocking. But I'm interested to hear more about your experience when you were in Seattle. I know Seattle undertook a pretty big look at racial and social equity, and it's about 10 years ago. And they really looked at all of their programs in government through that lens, and have since been updating their strategic plan. So I wonder how much of that work you were involved in, and how much that has really helped to create social and racial equity throughout government in Seattle.
The King County created a toolkit, and the cities began to use the databases from the toolkit. We still keep all of that data on social and racial equity issues. Only 2 jurisdictions, and now 2 more recently, adopted ordinances saying that they would not make the situation worse. So King County has, as a matter of its own adopted ordinances, saying that, and as they do their budget, they cannot do it in a way that creates additional harm and does not resolve issues in communities of color and communities that are poor. Seattle has endeavored to do the same thing. So what happens is we don't talk about equality because that's not the issue. The issue is equity. And so we're beginning to see an equitable transition in our community. And we're very, very, very proud of what we've been able to accomplish so far. But it was a very necessary tool that we had. The federal government has now adopted that policy by executive order. After the agency deputy secretaries came through the Presidential Management Council, all of us agreed that there should be an executive order that would simply state that the federal government shall operate and implement plans and strategies and financing that are designed to be equitable, not equal, but equitable, and change the life outcomes of people who are poor, people who not speak English as a primary language, and people of color. And that's now embodied in the president's executive order. So we'll see another transition over time as the federal government makes its adjustments as well. It's worked out really, really well, though. The challenge now is those neighborhoods are gentrifying, so now we're looking at how to put affordable housing measures in place, and to ensure that as those neighborhoods transition and become better, that we don't push poor people out. So now we're endeavoring to make sure that is not the outcome of the improvements to communities.
Thank you. I think that's all the time we have for this session. I want to again thank J.P. Morgan Chase for having been the sponsor of this session, sponsor of this session, sponsor of this session, sponsor of this session, sponsor of this session.